Remember Bobby? I brought her all the way from
Yeah, good to double check. One more sip. Good morning, everyone. Nope. It's on, isn't it? Oh, okay. Thank you. It's always a pleasure when someone wants me to turn it on. Okay, well, it's wonderful to see the fellowship taking place. So I was kind of reluctant to actually get started, but I suppose I should. Um, and I'm glad all of you are here, and it's wonderful to see John and Stacy here. And I was praying last night that maybe that would happen. So that's a good sign. But I was kidding John, and Larry was back there at that point too, and saying, looking back and seeing him back there, it kind of reminds me when I was a ministry student and having, to deliver a speech before class and looking back there and seeing my professor taking notes, and critiquing. So I told him, if I see him taking notes, I know that I'm in trouble. Now, Larry, he came up here, so he could probably hide it better because I can't really see. Okay, we've been looking at the Gospel of Mark, and we're in chapter 14. And last week, we looked at the first portion of Mark where Jesus is anointed by the woman with the expensive perfume, and this is all taking place right before Passover occurs. And the disciples get a little upset with this happening because Passover was also noted as a time to contribute to the poor. And they tell Jesus, this woman wasted this. It was nice she anointed you, but this could have been sold and given to the poor. And Jesus says, what she's done is commendatory. And wherever this gospel is preached, what she did will be known. And then Jesus warns that somebody might be betraying him during the Lord's Supper. And he institutes the Lord's Supper, and we talked about how Jesus is the Passover lamb, and that some of the disciples must have been quite puzzled by this reference to eating his body and drinking his blood. I'm not sure if there's much more abhorrent to a Jew or a Muslim. Eating blood or drinking blood is very strictly prohibited. And throughout all humanity, cannibalism is not accepted either. So this whole thing about eating my body and drinking my blood, I'm sure they were a little puzzled about what Jesus was doing here. And only later would they fully understand. Jesus says that, this eating of the body and drinking the blood is something that signifies a new covenant that I am bringing about. And that's where we get the idea of New Testament. A testament is a covenant. And we follow the New Testament, not the Old Testament in terms of commandments and procedures. That's why some people who want to institute Old Testament commandments, that's not quite right. We follow the New Covenant, the New Testament. And there are certain prohibitions and requirements of the Old Covenant that we are no longer under. And one of the issues in the early church was, the eating of meat that was sometimes sacrificed to others. And Jesus makes a point, and later on, Paul especially has to make a point to Peter that all foods are clean, that we're no longer under that old covenant. So, in verse 27, we're going to start kind of where we left off. Jesus said, "You will all fall away, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep will be scattered." And that verse is from Zechariah 13, verse 7. And in the original context, it's referring to the Davidic king being struck. When Jerusalem was going to be conquered by Nebuchadnezzar. And all the Jews were scattered. However, now Jesus is referring to himself. David? Oh, okay. He was looking at me like I was either doing something wrong or maybe I shouldn't just look at the back then. And Jesus elaborates. He says, "I tell you the truth, today, yes, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. And he says this to Peter because Peter said, if all fall away, I will not. Peter is confident that if everybody else leaves, I will not leave you. He's very, very sure. But Jesus has to tell him that actually, you will deny me 3 times. And before the rooster crows, the second time. So when dawn is approaching, you would have already done this. And Peter insisted emphatically, even if I have to die with you, I will never disown you. And all the others said the same. Now, later when Jesus was arrested, Peter did try. He pulled a sword. And, at that point, he was true to what he had declared. But later on, as we'll see, things changed. So then they went to Gethsemane. And Gethsemane is actually a couple of miles from the center of Jerusalem. And Jesus said to his disciples, sit here while I pray. And he took Peter, James, and John along with him. And he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. And Mark quotes, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, he said to them. Stay here and keep watch. And going a little farther, he fell to the ground and prayed that if possible, the hour might pass from him. Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Take this cup from me, yet not what I will, but what you will. Now, when Jews typically prayed, they prayed out loud. So the apostle John, James, and Peter were able to hear him. And I'm sure they were puzzled about his anxiety, his pleas, his sorrow, and what was the cup that he wanted God to take away from him. The cross, yeah. Now, imagine if you were aware that you were going to face execution, but you didn't have to. What would your prayer be?
Thank you for the opportunity, but I'm not here.
What? Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, but I passed, right? Okay, yeah. All right. And you can imagine, Jesus is probably going through his mind thinking of maybe other possibilities. But he was aware that no, this was what he was destined for. And I think sometimes we underestimate how much anxiety Jesus had at this point. I mean, yes.
How could we know?
Yeah, I suppose, when we're on our deathbed, if we are dying and we know it, we might feel some of that anxiety. But still, the anxiety was not as much about him dying, but about what? How he was going to die. Okay? Yeah, on the cross. Now, one of the prayers that I've had all of my life is that there are certain things I don't want to die from. I don't want to die in great pain. I think that kind of summarizes the different methods that I've thought about. And there's no guarantee of that, is there? When I was a minister, I was at the deathbed of several people. And most of them were, the ones I'm thinking about, they had advanced terminal cancer. And they were in great pain. until they were given enough morphine. And that's when I began to realize what a blessing that is. I was in Santa Monica, California, and this wonderful woman, member of the church, she had, was it stomach cancer? Anyway, but she was, what? No, she had stomach cancer, I think. But pancreatic cancer can be very painful too. I saw one of my brother-in-laws die from it. He was in a great deal of pain. But when this woman was dying, the last time I went to see her in the ICU, I talked to the doctor and he said, no, she's probably not feeling much right now. And I said, oh, thank goodness. But Jesus didn't have any drugs to help him deal with the pain, did he? Okay. And just, I can't imagine, the struggle of knowing, not just that you're going to die, but you're going to die a tough death. Okay. And sometimes, to me, part of the value of the death of Jesus is that is to us also a message that God really knows in Jesus what it's like for us to feel those feelings. The cross is not only the basis of our forgiveness and cleansing of our sins, but also Jesus is showing us that God knows what it likes to be in pain and to be in suffering and to be worried about your suffering coming up. And for me, that's a valuable lesson that I try to keep in mind in other times when I'm struggling. What are some of the struggles that we have in this day-to-day life that give us pain? Finances, yes. Have you ever been worried about, okay, how am I going to pay for this? Yeah. Finances, you can be in extreme anguish and extreme depression. What other things can give us a lot of pain? Huh? Children, yeah. Okay. What an honest answer. Children are a wonderful blessing. And I used to tell young couples when they first had a baby, I said, well, 90% of the time your children are wonderful blessings, but that 10% can be rough. And something, I think I've mentioned this a few years ago. There was a woman in Iowa City who, bless her heart, she had, when our second son was born, Mark, and Mark's brother was 5 at the time, and I asked Ann, does it get better? And she had a 21-year-old son. And I said, boy, I think I actually said something like, we know, Ann, it must be so much easier when they turn 21 and become an adult. Okay, you got it. And she immediately turned to me and said, no, Mike, okay, let me give you some real important advice. In many ways, you worry more. And I remember that, obviously, but I didn't fully believe her until later on. Yes.
I can remember when we were I was the oldest of 3 boys, and Mom would get so frustrated. Her word, I hope you have 3 boys just.
Yes, my father said the same thing to us. I hope you have a son just like you, so you know. And of course, he had that experience of witnessing my 2 sons and the aggravation sometimes they provoke, and I couldn't help but notice his smiling. I knew what he was thinking too. Okay, so sometimes our children, because we love our children so much, we suffer. We feel worried. upset, depressed, disappointed. Jesus knows how we feel. Jesus undoubtedly was thinking about all of God's children. That's what he was doing this for. What other things can get us feeling anguished and upset and
How about
And-
ex-boyfriends?
how about what?
Ex-boyfriends and.
Oh, okay, yeah, relationships, ex-boyfriends, and relationships that don't work. Okay,
Disease.
probably the first time you had a breakup, you maybe a teenager, you didn't think you'd ever make it, did you? It was just overwhelming. I'll never find another. And my youngest son said that one time before he met his wife. And Spencer knows exactly what I'm referring to because he was there. Okay, relationships can be very, very overwhelming.
I think the number one problem we have going on now would be social media or media in general. The social, that seems to be pitting one group against the other, it doesn't matter what group you're in.
That's very true. There's a lot of anxiety, anger, pain because of the social media.
Judgment.
Hmm?
Judgment. Judging people.
Yeah, judging people. Yeah. And some young people take all that so seriously, they kill themselves. They're bullied online. And I've been praying for our country and the world because I think sometimes we pay too much attention to all the negativity. I mean, one of the ways you can become popular is to be negative. And does that add to our unnecessary anxiety and pain? Sure it does. Okay. And did Jesus encounter any opposition and pain from other of his countrymen, fellow Jews?
How about pets? We become very
What?
pets.
Yeah, pets, losing a pet. Because pets become part of the family, don't they? Yeah. Things that we love can create a great deal of anxiety and pain. And so if you think about it, when you are dealing with pain, being sick. Anybody enjoy the flu? I don't see any hands. Okay. Anybody enjoy a stomach bug? Okay. Yeah. And some of us are dealing with, illnesses that won't ever go away. Okay. And, some of you and some of my siblings have severe fibromyalgia or arthritis. That won't ever go away. Okay. And others have even more severe illnesses. John with his kidneys, Stacy with her migraines, some of my children with their migraines and neurological problems, and my wife, many of my siblings. It will never get better.
How many kids do you have?
I have 4 children.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and nine grandchildren and 1 more on the way. Yeah. In other words, I'm old as dirt. Yeah, my oldest is 46. Yeah. So, and I'll tell you what, my oldest granddaughter, I'll never forget when she was 4, she had to go to Children's Hospital because of her kidneys. That was painful for me too. What?
Okay.
And she's okay. She's doing great. She just graduated from high school, starting college.
My niece that just graduated from high school herself.
What?
My niece just graduated from high school.
Oh, okay. Same age then. Yeah. So, as a parent, one of the most painful things is to have your children hurting, isn't it? I will never forget the times that I go back all the way to my oldest son and watching him get a spinal tap at the age of 4. But then again, he was like this. He couldn't walk and he was great pain. And we were afraid it was meningitis. It wasn't, fortunately. But I'll never forget watching that needle go in. I think it hurt me more than it did him. Okay. So when your children hurt, it hurts you. I'm not sure if it's always true to say it hurts you more than them, but it feels like it. Okay. And because we love our children so much, or our spouse, that is pain. My wife is undergoing, she's got Parkinson's and some dementia now, and watching her not able to do so many things, it hurts. I'm fighting a lot of depression, a lot of helplessness. So it produces pain that you can't quantify. But I know for me, there are times when I look back at what Jesus is going through here as described in Mark, and that gives me a sense of companionship. Jesus really, really does know what it's like to feel pain and worry and anguish in our lives. And sometimes the best thing that you can have is someone who at least understands what you're going through.
Mike, you always, not always, but people, they'll express their hurt and their illness and their anguish and the example that Jesus had the weight of the world on his shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we'll want pity on ourselves for things that are pretty minor that'll pass quickly. But we can get really bogged down with that.
Yes, we can. Sometimes we blow things up a little bit more. And, I haven't been referring to that kind of thing at this point, but there are times we do have to keep a perspective. Okay. I mean, I don't enjoy when I get the flu, but all things considering, that's relatively minor. Okay.
You mentioned how when your child is in pain, you're in pain. I remember one time when my son was injured, it was just the most helpless feeling in the world. And I think about the father watching his son go through this,
Mm-hmm.
and then having the son ask him, can we do this somehow, some different way? And
Well, if your son in that moment asked you, can you take away this pain and this difficulty, as a father, and you had the power, wouldn't you do it? That's the other thing. Jesus knew his father could do it, but he also knew not my will, but yours. He knew he had to make this sacrifice for all of us who did not deserve it. Okay. So this anxiety, this anguish, I think we sometimes minimize this time of Jesus' life. When he, remember earlier in his, before his ministry, he went to the desert and prayed and fasted for 40 days and 40 nights, and same kind of thing. underestimate just how difficult that was for Jesus. Because sometimes we focus on Jesus' divinity too much. And we don't remember that he really was a man in the flesh, as John says. So Jesus, take this cup from me, in verse 36, yet not what I will, but you will. Then he returned to his disciples, and how did he find them? Sleeping. So despite all this anguish, and we don't know how much time this took, it must have been a while. And Jesus, he says, Simon, are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch for 1 hour? Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the body is weak. Now remember, in Mark 13, how many times did Jesus use the word watch out? Keep watch. When he was predicting his his suffering, the destruction of Jerusalem, and his second coming. Watch out. Be on guard. Don't fall asleep. So this theme continues here. Peter, have you fallen asleep? Couldn't you watch for even 1 minute or 1 hour? And so one more time, he went away and prayed the same thing. When he came back again, he found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. They didn't know what to say to him. I think they were pretty embarrassed, don't you think? Okay. They were admittedly, they were tired. Who knows what time of the night this all started? But, Jesus, this is a good example Mark is pointing out again, as these three apostles needed to stay awake, we need to stay awake. Okay? For the things that Jesus described in Mark 13. And Paul reiterates that theme numerous times in his letters. So, we come to verse 43. This is when the action starts. Just as he was speaking, Judas, one of the 12, appeared, and with him was a crowd armed with swords and clubs sent from the chief priests, the teachers of the law, and the elders. Now the betrayer had arranged a signal with them. The one that I kiss is the man. Arrest him and lead him away under guard. Going at once to Jesus, Judas said, Rabbi, and kissed him. And the men seized Jesus and arrested him. And then one of those standing near drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. And then Jesus said, Am I leading a rebellion, that you have come out with swords and clubs to capture me? Every day I was with you, teaching in the temple courts, and you did not arrest me. But the scriptures must be fulfilled. And then everyone deserted him and fled. A young man wearing nothing but a linen garment was following Jesus, and when they seized him, he fled naked, leaving his garment behind. Now, we don't know who that was. It might have been one of the apostles. Some say it was Peter. Others say maybe it was Mark. We'll never know. But what Jesus had warned had occurred. They all left. They all deserted. And Peter is the one who drew the sword and cut off the ear. At first, he was showing that resolve. But Jesus' statement, am I leading rebellion? And Jesus was not there for violence or for political revolution, which is what I think is part of the motive of Judas, because I think he thought Jesus had betrayed his image of what he wanted the Messiah to be, what many of the Jews of the time wanted as a political Messiah to restore the literal kingdom of David. So now Jesus is being led by these guards to the Jewish authorities. And they took Jesus to the high priest, and all the chief priests, elders, and teachers of the law came together. Now, the high priest at this time was Caiaphas. And interestingly, we have found Caiaphas' home. It's in Jerusalem. And it was a very prestigious home for its time. And we know Caiaphas had a very long rule as chief priest. Most chief priests only lasted about 4 years. He was a chief priest, let's see here, I've got it written down, from 18 to 37 AD, almost 20 years. And he's brought before the Sanhedrin. And the Sanhedrin traditionally contained up to 70 Jewish authorities. The quorum was 23. So it's not necessary that all 70 were there at this point, but they had enough. And the others who were there, elders and teachers of the law, and undoubtedly the scribes, most of the scribes were the Pharisees. And other elders would have been referring to the, some of the probably rich elite, the leaders of Jerusalem, behind the scenes of the chief priests and the elders. And we have a description from rabbinic sources of how this was set up. You basically had the Sanhedrin in a circle, kind of a semicircle, seated, and the accused and witnesses would all be standing before them, kind of like this. So they had already picked up numerous witnesses to bring these charges against Jesus. And what are some of the charges you think they're going to bring? Yeah. Doing miracles and other things, violating the Sabbath laws. Okay, he was criticized for that. Mm-hmm. Was he eating with the right people? What about clean and unclean? How can you eat with the tax collectors? Those people are collaborators. How can you be eating with them and prostitutes and other people who are known throughout the community as very bad people, sinners? So if you're a prophet, what kind of prophet does something like that? If you really know God, you know that God wouldn't put up with that, wouldn't eat bread with them, sit at the same table, converse with them, laugh with them. So what other charges possibly? Yeah. Right. How dare you claim that you can forgive sins directly? Only God can do that. Okay. Yeah, the incident in the temple, and that's going to come up here. Who are you to come in and tell us how to run the temple? And you were violent. How dare you? You're not a priest. You have you defiled. Now, this was not the inner sanctum by any means. It was on the outer courts. But still, it's all considered holy part of the temple. How dare you come in and defile the temple? And something I learned while doing some research on this is that even in Roman law, it was a capital offense to violate or destroy a holy place. So, in my opinion, what Jesus did in the temple was the turning point. Because this would be something that, as I mentioned last week, many of the leaders of the Jews were already upset with Jesus, wanted to do something to get rid of this guy's influence, but now he's a threat to the Roman authorities stepping in. And as I mentioned, Josephus mentions previous people who had tried to rebel and the slaughter that happened. And the leaders of the Jews, who undoubtedly were alive back then, because it only happened about 10 years before, did not want to repeat. We don't want to see dead bodies in the temple grounds and in Jerusalem because of some stupid rebellion. So Jesus already had done some things that were, quite suspect to the Jewish authorities. Now, at this point then, the chief priests and the whole of Sanhedrin were looking for evidence against Jesus so they could put him to death. The issue here is not putting him in prison or in some way limiting him. They've got to get rid of him. And in John's gospel, John's gospel is probably the most accurate when Caiaphas says it's better for one man to die than the whole nation. I think that really sums up perfectly why the leaders of the Jews felt they had to get rid of Jesus, because they knew at this point, with his following and with already a lot of people thinking he is the Messiah and maybe he's going to lead a rebellion, and we don't want that, it's better for one man to die than the whole nation. Okay? So they're looking for evidence, but they couldn't find any. Many testified falsely against him, but their statements did not agree. Now, one of the other things I learned is that according to Jewish tradition, if you had witnesses, even a relatively minor contradiction or misstatement would be considered, to eliminate that witness as credible. So probably they might have been saying some things that were accurate, but their statements conflicted in some ways, and according to their procedures, they couldn't accept that evidence. Almost like today's courts, I object. Objection sustained. Okay. So the high priest then decided to take it up upon himself, Caiaphas. And he stood up before them and asked Jesus. Oh, wait a minute. I skipped one. Some stood up and gave this false testimony against him. We heard him say, I will destroy this man-made temple in 3 days and will build another, not made by man. Well, Jesus, he talked about the temple being destroyed, but he didn't say he would destroy it. And he didn't say that he would build another temple. So that statement couldn't hold either. So finally, the high priest says, okay, we've got to get this done. I will question him myself. And this will be probably my last point here, because Mike's gotten up, so that's the signal. The high priest, okay. The high priest stood up before them and asked Jesus, are you not going to answer? What is this testimony that these men are bringing against you? But Jesus remained silent and gave no answer. Now, this was very frustrating. Jesus would not defend himself. So finally, again, the high priest asked him, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus said, "I am." And then what he says next is what really won over the chief priest for his charges. "And you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven." The high priest tore his clothes. "Why do we need any more witnesses?" he asked. "You have heard the blasphemy. What do you think?" What Jesus is saying is, I am the Christ, and you will see me on the right hand of God coming. Again, some Jewish tradition said only the Most High could declare the Messiah. Jesus is declaring it himself. Plus, he's stating that he's a Messiah that only God could possibly declare. And this Messiah sitting on the right hand of God, oh my goodness. Not sitting on the throne of David, but sitting on the right hand of God. This was blasphemous, according to their tradition, because he was making statements that were considered degrading to God. He's usurping God by saying he's a Messiah and by saying he will be sitting on the right hand of God. Okay, well, we'll close at that point, and we'll see how things now quickly move toward his persecution and execution. Thank you for your questions and your attendance, and I didn't notice anybody snoring again, so that was always positive. Well, someone was doing it quietly.